Namaskar and good evening. The very name Justice, M N Venkatachaliah, brings to one's mind a character and a personality astoundingly great and commanding reverence and admiration as much as for profundity of his scholarship as the graciousness of his nature. He is, to use Justice Krishna Iyer's language, that great jurist of light and learning, in whom the qualities of a brilliant head and a tender heart are exquisitely fused. It is generally believed, and it seems to be true, that a large extent that professional success and glory, whether as a judge or as a lawyer, can be very corrupting to the cause of constitutionalism. Justice Venkatachaliah is an honorable exception. Burke once said that the law sharpens the mind by narrowing it, but in the few of our great judges, law has lifted the mind to a level of comprehension and has kindled a degree of humane ardor unsurpassed in any other profession. Justice Venkatachaliah was sworn in as the judge of the Karnataka High Court on Thursday, November the 6th, 1975, and then began a glorious and glittering judicial career, distinguished by great qualities of head and heart, which mark the man and the judge. Crossing over from the bar to the bench, he brought to bear on his work as a judge variety of qualities that soon made him one of the most eminent judges. He was a judge's judge, and his idiom was the law. His first reported judgment is dated December the 15th, 1975, in Khadi and Village Industries Commission versus NSPAN, wherein he neatly dealt with the intricate question of exclusion of the jurisdiction of the civil court. There was no looking back ever. Though he had a large circle of friends, Justice Venkatachaliah kept himself aloof once he became the judge. It happened one day that at some wedding that he and his wife attended, some guest made a very casual mention to Mrs. Venkatachaliah that Justice Venkatachaliah was hearing a particular case. The next day, the judge mentioned this in his court and rescued himself. Such was his level of probity. Justice Venkatachaliyah's court was a classroom, a seminar hall, where one could repair and come out better informed. A judge's scholarship and knowledge should help initiate a steer, a debate and discussion. A case before him meant a discussion about the fundamentals. No less a counsel than Mr. Fali Nariman himself, who is with us today, when he was free, would sit in Justice Venkatachaliyah's court in the Supreme Court to watch and absorb. Justice R.V. Ravindran describes him as a walking encyclopedia on law, and Mr. D.R. Karthikeyan as the man with full of grace and competence and scholarship, very independent, who maintained the integrity of office really high. Dr. Vivek Debroy says that there have been many Chief Justices who fade away after retirement. Justice Venkatachaliah certainly has not faded away. He still remains very active at this age of 93 years. Justice Ravindran further says his house is an open house. He himself calls it a free legal aid clinic. Justice Venkatachaliyah's son, Mr. Sesha Raghav, recounted an instance and said, "I was walking down the corner of the street and there was a middle-aged woman from the village. She walked up to me and said, 'There's an old man here who gives free advice and justice. Where is he and where can I meet up with him?' Such has been his connect on the eve of his elevation to the Supreme Court, where the then law minister, Mr. Shiv Shankar, met him at a wedding reception. And he said, 'The Prime Minister must also know whom he is appointing. And as a procedure, you should call on the Prime Minister.' Justice Venkatachaliah said, 'I'm sorry, but I'm not in the habit of calling or meeting anyone, leave alone the Prime Minister with whom I have no work.' He was cautioned that I might be putting my appointment at stake. So shall I convey this to the Prime Minister? Please do so. Do convey to the Prime Minister." Exactly the same words, said Justice Venkatachaliah. Rajiv Gandhi then sent for him and said that, "I am proud to be a Prime Minister of a country where there are still judges like this. Kindly announce his name today before he withdraws his consent." He is likened with a banyan tree that is completely selfless, stands under the heat, provides shade to others, and is not in the business of proclaiming its existence. It is indeed apposite to mention here that Mr. Nariman once said, addressing the bar at Bangalore in February 1993, when Justice Venkatachaliah became the Chief Justice of India, he said that he had had no occasion to appear before Venkatachaliah in the High Court. Venkatachaliah took his seat in the Supreme Court quietly and unobtrusively, but very soon one knew that a great judge had arrived. He went on to say that wherever Napoleon stood, that was the center of the battlefield. Wherever Venkatachaliah sat, that was the center of the court. On his becoming Chief Justice, the center was rightfully his. High tribute, and so very well deserved. This is Justice M N Venkatachaliah, the man and the judge. And with this, I hand over the mic to the author of the book and our moderator for the day, Mr. Sudhish Pai.
Good evening and namaskar. I have to stand in today for our good friend, Mr. Arvind Datar, whose mother-in-law passed away last evening and therefore is unable to be with us. I acknowledge all the efforts that Mr. Datar has put in to make this panel discussion what it would be. It is universally acknowledged that Chief Justice Venkatachaliah is a great judge and a great man. No lawyer, however junior, felt embarrassed in his court where good law was well administered. In the maze and labyrinth of adjudged cases, he walked with a firm step, holding aloft the torch of justice. The man is as great as the judge. He has mastery of language, understanding of the capabilities and limitations of institutions, learning in the law, and wisdom in life. Indeed, Mr. Nariman, speaking at the book release last year, said, to have known Justice Venkatachaliah is to have known the importance of true wisdom. I have had the privilege of knowing Justice Venkatachaliah for about 4 decades since my days as a law student. I have learned at his feet. He has set my imagination on fire and kindled in me interest in things beyond the mundane and the ordinary. This endeavor has been with the aim that the rich harvest of his life and work should not go ungathered. Of course, it is impossible to do justice to a man whom Justice Krishna had called the great jurist of light and learning, to put it in the confines of a book. But the endeavor has been to that extent, and it is my respectful tribute to a master who, in the beautiful words of Matthew Arnold, is the personification of sweetness and light. I am deeply beholden to the eminent panelists, and I would begin by quoting Justice Hidayatullah, who said, there are judges and judges, and then there are great judges. I'm sure all of us are agreed that unquestionably, Justice Venkatachaliah is a great judge. On this, may I have the response of each of you eminent panelists. So would Mr. Nariman respond or Mr. Venugopal respond? I leave it to you, the two seniors, to begin.
You should.
Yes.
Thank you. Actually, by order of precedence, you should.
Yeah.
But certainly, thank you, Venu. Thank you. And thank you, Sudhish. I started my practice in the High Court of Bombay in November 1950, the year of the Constitution, and in the Supreme Court of India from May 1972.
So it's exactly 50 years now. So exactly 50 years now, May 2022.
But ever since then, though India has had a succession of Chief Justices since 1950, 48 in all, I am truly surprised that there is not any book other than this one, a great one, that expounds and expands on a former Chief Justice of India. There is not even one on great Chief Justices like, I believe, S.R. Das was, like Subbarao was, and like Venkatachaliah has been. I therefore applaud and commend Sudish Pai for his original idea and the research, tremendous research that has gone into this excellent book. For singing praises of this judge, as we are doing today, it is because of Justice R.S. Pathak, who recommended his appointment as judge of the Supreme Court of India when he was only number 2 in the Karnataka High Court. But, and this is very important, only after visiting that High Court, speaking to members of the bar and bench in Bangalore, and coming to the conclusion that he was fit material for the Supreme Court. Justice Gajendra Gatka, Justice Hidayatullah, all good judges, have separately written their memoirs, but there has been no one like the spirited Sudish to record their performances in court. It is only the assiduousness of my good friend Sudish Pai which makes me say how fortunate Chief Justice Venkatachaliah is, because I believe that Dr. Johnson has found his Boswell. Justice Venkatachaliyah's tryst with justice has been not only in decision-making, but equally importantly in deportment in court. I recall one incident that has been an eye-opener for me. I recall sitting one day in court number 1 when a party in person was arguing his case. The party in person raised his voice and on one occasion shouted at the Chief Justice. Venkatachaliah, always calm, imperturbable, invariably polite, for once lost his cool. He shouted back. Then quickly realizing what he had done, a few moments later, he put down the case papers in his hand and said, Mr. So-and-so, today is not the day when we will deal with your case. We will hear it when we are both in a better mood next week. How graceful, how gentlemanly, and how sporting. Because this judge truly believed that only then would justice be done. He had a penchant for justice, not just law, but justice. And that is why his judgment in the Union Carbide settlement case, an otherwise very disputed and critical case, is such a permanent record. According to me, speaking for the Constitution bench of 5 judges, he has clearly and authoritatively drawn a distinction between the two great concepts of law and justice. In that case, by upholding the constitutional validity and importance of Article 142. Justice Venkatachaliah has a great number of people who speak very, very highly of him. And I have not seen anybody who has been critical of him as a man or as a judge. Nobody has ever doubted his integrity. And he was the one Chief Justice who was respected not only by the bar and by the public, but what is very, very important, he was looked up to by his own colleagues. That I think is very, very important for the stature of a Chief Justice. Thank you, Sudish, for giving me this opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the attorney.
Yes, please. Okay. I have glanced through Sudish Pai's book on Venkatachaliah. And what I found was that it is indeed a treasure trove, as it were, of shining a light on the revered individual, namely the Chief Justice M N Venkatachaliah, great jurist that he was recognized as. It contains an authoritative account of Justice Venkatachaliyah's life and times, a number of interesting anecdotes, and summarizes practically all of his landmark judgments. I congratulate Sudesh Pai for his work. I had occasion to appear before Justice Venkatachaliah, as he then was, in the Karnataka High Court. And this was a case where I had challenged the validity of the Karnataka Chit Funds Act. It went on for nearly 3 days. And I was not unhappy when I found that the validity of the act was upheld, because I had not expected anything different. It was because of the client saying that challenge it, let's see what we can happen. Because after all, a law like a regulatory law in the nature of a Chit Funds Act, where many people can suffer getting their fingers burnt, as it were. Therefore, it was not unexpected that the case should be decided against him. After that, when I came as Additional Solicitor General to New Delhi and settled down here, I had more than one occasion to appear before Justice Venkatachaliah as a puisne judge and as a Chief Justice. And I should say that so far as he is concerned, very difficult to find a judge as learned as he was. And he used to give us lectures from the bench in regard to various aspects of Constitution, and mostly citing US judgments. He had all these at his fingertips. He was indeed a great jurist, but he was also a highly spiritual person. And it was a pleasure to have appeared before him, to have known him, and I could mention any number of judgments which he has delivered, which are outstanding. Do you want me to mention those, or let Venkatramani?
I think if you don't mind, after Mr. Venkatramani responds to the first question, then we can come to those.
Thank you, Suresh ji. It's a pleasure to be standing between two eminent jurists. And when you asked me and organizers said, so would you be part of the panel of jurists, it is certainly an invitation that cannot be resisted. And when you asked me again, I was groping for words, because I had 3 periods in my professional career where I had close associations with Justice Venkatachaliah. So I was trying to grope for a correct word. I thought, did I encounter this Venkatachaliah in the first instance when he wrote the foreword for a book in Justice Chinnappa-Reddy's in 1989? And I thought the word encounter is too strong a word, it connotes certain other things. But I found in Shakespeare, there is a less known word. In 12th Night, Sir Toby's question to Cesario is, will you encounter the house? And it said he extends an invitation to enter Olivia's domain, stirring up the creative aspirations and energetic passions latent in Illyria. I think that's what I can say. When he wrote the foreword for book on Justice Chinnappa-Reddy, I really encountered him by entering into his mind. The second thing which I can talk about is when he took over as the chairman of the NHRC, I was for a brief period amicus in the NHRC. The post-militancy in Punjab brought about an important case before the NHRC. And the question was whether those who were killed during encounters called the Lavaria deaths, the state is liable to pay any damages in public law. Arguing as an amicus, I said passionately, yes, they must, the state is liable to pay. It was a great task for me to convince Justice Venkatachaliah that a militant who is the enemy of the state is still entitled to damages in the hands of the state. I think I traveled quite a few passionate days in engaging in conversations with him in NHRC. The matter subsequently traveled up to Supreme Court and ended after a long period of litigation where I think many of them got some damages. That's the second, encounter. The third one was in 2000 when he was appointed as the chairperson of the Constitutional Review Commission, courtesy Professor Manon, with whom I had a long association as a student. So I also became a member of the subcommittee and director principles of state policy. And I remember every evening, I used to spend my days with him in Vigyan Bhavan after the court hours and talking about the intricate connection between economics, politics, sociology, psychology, and a wide range of subjects. You know what you may. And then I recollect also after the three important encounters I have with him, I would call the first one an encounter, the second one an embrace, the third one an adoption. So all the three aspects of my being with him, a lifelong companionship, I think, is so fulfilling. It's so fulfilling. Second only to my close association with Justice Krishna Iyer and none else. So to just sum up, before we talk further about him, it was said in June 1969 when Chief Justice Earl Warren was preparing to retire from his position as Chief Justice of the United States, a reporter asked him how he would like to have the Warren Court to be remembered. It is reported that Warren responded with a simple assertion, the People's Court. I think your book is talking about a people's judge and about a people's court, which Justice Venkatachaliah adorned both in Karnataka High Court and the Supreme Court. And what more can there be for a judge to be satisfied that he sat in a people's court and made the court a people's court? And when Nariman was talking about his gentle, amiable dispositions, he's also said about our great Juris Cardozo. One of his, I must say that Sudesh Pai asked me to talk today evening. I just lined up all the books on the great judges, but US Supreme Court judges and UK. I really could not find out a judge about whom such a voluminous but very perverse, a perspective literature has been compiled and gathered. I did not find that. Many of these books are in biographies, and they talk about some important landmark judgments. But the connection between the judicial career of judge right from day one till retired was lacking in Supreme Court. I think you have set a trend for more and more erudite, compilations in the genre of literature. And just to complete my initial narration, it was said about Cardozo that he had no enemies. Well, hardly any, because his personal style was conciliatory and not adversarial. And his gentleness, integrity, and generous nature are legendary. And in these respects, at least the legend is accurate. I think I should do the same thing about Justice Venkatachaliah. Beyond that, I have so many personal moments. After my initial encounter at Chinnappa preface, I remember after I wrote the preface for Chinnappa book, I sent a forward to Justice Chinnappa. I got a handwritten letter from Justice Chinnappa, which I preserved even today. He said, disregard an earlier preface written by another Supreme Court judge. Your book does not deserve that kind of a preface. This preface fits in well with your hard work put in Chinnappa judgment. I must praise Justice Venkatachaliah for the time he has taken to concur with me on some of his opinions by writing a very beautiful, foreword. A foreword which runs in only 3-4 pages. So I'm really happy to be here today. I think probably we can say more and more things about Venkatachaliah. More about my personal life with him, I think we'll reserve for some other day.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Venugopal wanted to refer to some of the cases that he had in mind. Maybe Borobabu Singh, where Chief Justice called the Manipur speaker to the court, and where you had appeared for him, sir. And the Babri Masjid also, where
Dr. Borobabu Singh was the Speaker of the Manipur Legislative Assembly. And the Speaker believes that he is immune from the jurisdiction of the courts. And that is because the Constitution itself gives the Speaker a very special position. The courts are not entitled to interfere with the internal working of the Assembly. But nevertheless, he came to a situation where a notice was issued to him to appear before the court. He thought that it was totally inappropriate that the Supreme Court of India or any court should summon him. He refused. after 2 or 3 similar summons from the Supreme Court of India, from Chief Justice Venkatachaliah, Chief Justice Venkatachaliah did not hesitate to direct the police to arrest him and bring him before the court. And at that stage, he came to me. So I told him, look, it's now a little too late. Therefore, having lost a case, having been asked to appear, you have no choice. And therefore, you have been, the police have been asked to bring you. And therefore, in those circumstances, come with me, leave it to me. The judge is not going to haul you up for contempt, though he had committed contempt. And therefore, at 2 p.m., the matter was fixed for hearing. Borobadur Singh appeared. I took him and made him sit next to me. When the Chief Justice and the bench assembled, all of us stood up. He looked round. He asked, is the speaker here? I said, yes, my lord. He said, very well, in which case I'll close the matter. He did not choose to take any action against, which he could have. But of course, I think he may have thought of the constitutional restraints also on the judiciary in hauling up a speaker. It would have perhaps resulted in a crisis. But I'm sure that Chief Justice Venkatachaliah would not have hesitated, if the situation required, that he should issue notice of contempt and convict him. And that's a Borobadur Singh case.
But this was not for his work as speaker in the assembly. This was for his administrative side, heading the secretariat to the speaker, not for anything he did in the house, presiding over its deliberations.
That's right. Then the next one, the Babri Masjid, was a case where I was appearing for Kalyan Singh, who was the Chief Minister of UP. And there was a strong material which the Attorney General then, Mr. Milan Banerjee, produced before the court to say that they had secret reports showing that there would be an attempt to demolish the Babri Masjid. And they produced he appeared in court before Justice Venkatachaliah, as it then was, produced the material. But Shri Kalyan Singh filed an affidavit saying that he would have enough police force to protect the Babri Masjid. And based on the assurance in the affidavit, the matter was dropped by Justice Venkatachaliah. But I was having my lunch. I believe it was on a Sunday. And to my shock, I found people on top of the masjid with crowbars and pickaxes and so on, breaking the dome. And within 2 minutes, I got a call from the Justice Venkatachaliah's secretary, asking me to appear before him at his residence. And when I went there, there were a large number of reporters, photographers, and so on, and a little crowd of advocates. And Mr. Milan Banerjee also was there, and they asked me, they looked at me accusingly, and Justice Venkatachaliah, as he then was, he told me, you had assured us that nothing would happen. And see what is happening there in the television. I said, I did assure you. It is my client who has filed an affidavit to that effect. And if he has gone back upon that, then I can only hang my head in shame that this has happened. And I said that let this be stopped and let the bricks be put back quickly by the central government, so that by next morning, the masjid, the dome will be standing as it was before it was demolished. But Milan Banerjee said, no. He's now trying to pass on the buck and so on. And therefore, nothing happened, and the Babri Masjid was unfortunately demolished. Now, that is a position which happened there. And the sequel of that was Kalyan Singh was hauled up for contempt, and he was punished with what I thought was a rather mild punishment until the rising of the court. But all the big leaders were accused, and I had known Sri L.K. Advani from 1975 when I appeared in the Karnataka High Court, where he had been detained along with all the other leaders. And I had appeared for the person who became a railway minister later. And all of them are directed to be released. That is Sri Vajpayee, who was in house arrest in Delhi, and the others who were under arrest in the Bangalore court, because they were there when the emergency was declared. And though they were released then and there, the Sri A. N. Ray, who was then the Chief Justice, and everybody expected this. Without a single piece of paper, within an hour, the additional advocate general, Solicitor General, Sri V.P. Raman, mentioned it to him in open court. Manoj, look at this. Article 21 is suspended, and 19 is suspended, and the court has released his detainees. And without anything, A.N. said, stay the order, and that is what has happened. I appeared for L.K. Advani later on, and all of them were taken to Lucknow before the special judge, and they were all acquitted along with the casts. And that's the history of Babri Masjid.
Mr. Nariman sir, would you say something about Ranjit Thakur's case, which is Justice Venkatachaliyah's first judgment in the Supreme Court 10 days after he took his seat there?
Yes, yes.
And you had also said what Dr. Janjal quoted, that wherever Napoleon stood, that was the center of the battlefield. Wherever Justice Venkatachaliah sat, that's the center of the court. I remember hearing you say that in Bangalore in '93 on Justice Venkatachaliyah's appointment as the CJI.
Ranjit Thakur, thank you. Thank you. Ranjit Thakur was, as you said, one of his very early, perhaps his first judgment. Punishment must never be vindictive or unduly harsh, nor so disproportionate to the offense as to shock one's conscience. All of which, of course, is a reflection of the doctrine of proportionality. And this judgment establishes that irrationality and perversity are well-recognized grounds of judicial review. The case was based on principle, as almost every decision of Justice Venkatachaliah since then has been. In this case, Venkatachaliah reminded us of that famous familiar quote that the history of liberty has largely been the history of the observance of procedural safeguards. In this case, the court, exercising powers of judicial review, set aside a sentence handed down by a summary court martial, again on principle, because judicial from a whole lot of senior judges before him was remarkable. But fortunately, history has proved him right. Justice Rohinton Nariman, in his recent book on dissents,
Voice of dissent.
yes, calls this as one of his great dissents. The judge, one of the great dissents of the Supreme Court. Amongst the 9 or 10 dissents that are reproduced in that book, which is published just this year, this is number 6. And it was a dissent because he relied upon a larger bench decision which the majority had ignored. The bench decision in Mirajkar's case, that an order of a court can never be said to contravene fundamental rights. The court in that case held that an order transferring the case of Antule from a special court to the High Court was contrary to fundamental rights. And that's how the question came up. And it was remarkable because Justice Venkatachaliah, never forceful in his views in court, established in that case that one of the junior judges can be right on principle. And he was right on principle. And that's why he's reckoned today as one of the great dissents of the Supreme Court.
May I now request Mr. Venkatramani to say something about the Sikkim reservation, Podial's case, and also the Canara Electric Supply Company. That's one of the great judgments, I thought, in the High Court that Justice Venkatachaliah rendered, where the law was struck down, not as unconstitutional, but as unworkable.
Thank you, Mr. See, all of us know that this political ticket doctrine, ever since Tocqueville wrote in Democracy in America, there's scarcely any political question arises that is not resolved sooner or later in as a judicial question. So when you read this judgment in R.C. Podial, so you have three sets of judgments: the judgment by Justice Sharma, Chief Justice Sharma, Justice and concurring judgments of three judges. So one very interesting anecdote which I would like to share here is when Justice Venkatachaliah was in the process of writing the judgment, I sat in his court when the matter was being argued. So we had developed a habit of exchanging books. And I used to get back the books pat in point of time after he finishes reading them. There were quite a number of exchange of books we had. And if you look into Podial's case, there's a reference to a book by an English writer called Rodney Crozier. Yeah. I had that book with me, and it was a coincidence that we were having a dialogue that evening, and I said, "Sir, can I send you this book?" He was going to be any assistance, and I sent the book. I found, to my great delight, that it was used in the judgment. And one important principle which I think which Venkatachaliah always had in mind when talking about constitutional law interpretation. Just to put it a certain anecdote again, after he wrote my foreword for the Chinnappa book, he called me one day and said, "Have you read the Holmes' Lasky letters?" I said, "Sir, I have not read that." He got that book for me from the judge's library and said, "You must read it," particularly Frankfurter's very lengthy foreword for that book. And I did read that. And after that, I said, a habit of exchanging books began. So in the Holmes' Lasky letters, one of the discussions we had was about common law and the growth of common law. And he always said, "I think we still have not developed a jurisprudence of constitutional law in our country where the growth trajectory can be compared with the growth trajectory of common law in England. And can you tell me, can there be any difference between common law growth, and which is essentially in the context of statute, but as distinct from a constitutional law growth, to compare to what happened in the United States in 1789, Marbury was Madison, so on and so forth." I really could not find an answer to that. I thought it's a very, very involved issue, and it's for a full-length deliberation, and it went on like that. So when the judgment came, I realized that there's Venkatachaliah's very pervasive understanding, but at the same time, attentiveness to detail is number one. But how do you really keep in mind the importance of the ever-moving lines between separation of powers? I think R.C. Podial gives us a very important lesson. The separation of powers is not a fixed barrier, but an ever-moving line, carefully and creatively moved by judges as a particular occasion would demand, thereby protecting and preserving the creative dimensions of the separation of powers. Podial, I would call, is one such example. And if you ask me to comment on that High Court judgment on Canara, yes. Then I looked into the judgment and found out whether a law has been struck down by any court on the ground that the intractability of the language of the law is a reason. I couldn't really find any case where any court has struck it down on this ground. But I think it's a very important dimension that as one stint in the Law Commission, one of the questions that often we used to have discussion in the Law Commission was, how do you really make the language of a law tractable and the purpose of the law attainable? These are two important goals which a law should keep in mind. And very often you'll find that many of the legislations have lofty goals, but they're not attainable for a variety of reasons. Whether can a law be set aside or declared unconstitutional by only on the sole reason of intractability of a language, or the goal or the law object of the law is not attainable, I'm still not very sure. But I think it requires a very courageous judge to say, because ultimately the law is the purposeless law, why should it remain on the statute book? I think that's where probably Venkatachaliah picked up that understanding. I must really congratulate him for this very unique contribution and also an isolated judgment in the entire jurisprudence of striking down legislations.
Very good. Nice.
So it was said of Justice Frankfurter that his whole life was in a way a preparation for the Supreme Court, and his appointment had an aesthetically satisfying inevitability. Would we not be right in saying the same thing about Chief Justice Venkatachaliah? Attorney.
Oh, I mean, I didn't catch your question. Do you mind repeating that?
Yeah. I said, can it not be said of Justice Venkatachaliah as was said of Justice Felix Frankfurter, that his whole life was in a way a preparation for the Supreme Court, and his appointment had an aesthetically satisfying inevitability?
No, it was very clear from the very beginning when he was in the High Court itself, where I had appeared before him, that he stood out as a person totally different from the other judges. He was a brilliant jurist and so learned that you could listen to him citing case after case, which you should have looked up, but the lawyers failed to do so. And not only that, there was an air of spirituality about it. And I remember I was president of the Supreme Court Bar Association on the day when he retired, and the practice was for the SCBA to host a tea for the Chief Justice who was retiring, or any judge of the Supreme Court was retiring. And when he entered the lawns for with some other judges, I found a very large number of lawyers, senior lawyers, junior lawyers. They're practically queuing up to touch his feet, and not the practice of in the north of touching the knee. They're practically bending right down and touching his feet. Now this I thought was very strange, because this had never been seen in the case of any other judge. I've been here from as a regular practitioner from 1979, and this had never happened before. And this showed what a unique person Justice Venkatachaliah was.
So, Nariman sir, your response to that?
Yeah, you see what he speaks about, what the attorney just mentioned.
Yeah.
Makes me recall that one could look upon him as a holy person on the bench. He had that aura of holiness, And that's why I said to you that it was very rare to find him losing his cool as a judge. On the contrary, he was always composed, properly oriented, he had the right reactions, and somehow, as Venkatramani just told us, whenever he had gained some knowledge of something, he would share it with the rest of the bar. That was one great thing. He never showed off. He never wanted to make people believe that he was far superior to everybody else. On the contrary, he would say, Mr. So-and-so, have you read this? And he would hand down the book to you. It's a gesture which I have not seen any Chief Justice or any judge in the Supreme Court do since my time. But he was one of the regulars who did that, as Venkatramani said. I mean, I never exchanged any book with him. I never sent him any book. But he would always, whenever he'd see me or something and he had read something, he would immediately, even if I was not appearing in the case, he would point his finger and give it to the associate to say, give it to Nariman, let him read it. I mean, that's the sort of informality that was there. And therefore, I think that we have not seen his likes again. That is a regret that quite frankly I have.
So, Mr. Venkatramani, sir.
I was arguing a civil matter before Justice Venkatachaliah, and suddenly he said, have you read Noyer Service Society? Oh. He didn't strike any bell in my mind. I tried to collect, it took me a few seconds. Sir, is it something to do with justice? He said, yes, but go and read the judgment and come back. Then a few days later, when the matter came again, he said, I hope I did not become an unasked for teacher the other day. I said, not unasked for teacher. So I said, not at all, not at all. And so that's the way one has learned in his courtroom. But so many personal anecdotes come to my mind. So soon after I wrote my book on Chinnapareddy, a very close senior advocate of ours met me in the corridors one day and said, Justice Venkatachaliah was asking me, is Venkatramani a Marxist? So I asked myself a question, writing a book on Chinnapareddy, have I become a Marxist? So a few months later, I went to see a holy person who had come to Delhi, and I was dressed in the traditional way, dhoti and kurta, pajama, etc., and had gone to see Venkatachaliah. So the person, one of the staff there, and went and told Venkatachaliah, some pandit has come. So Venkatachaliah was wondering, who is that pandit whom I never gave a time today? So when he saw me, he had a huge laugh. And then he told me, I really asked so-and-so, your friend, are you a Marxist? Now I know that you are not. So, and the humility part of it, tell you, one day, along with Krishna, I had gone to see him at his home in Bangalore. Look at his humility. Venkatachaliah simply prostrated before Justice Krishna and said, sir, I must salute you. I salute you because you were a hero in many sense. If you don't do it today, I think I'll be failing in humility. And capturing exactly the words which Venkatachaliah uttered. So look at his humility. So I think I'm really happy again to be today sharing a few of my what called honey drop anecdotes, if you may put it like that, and Venkatachaliah's great lifetime companionship.
So would any one of you like to share any other personal experiences and anecdotes? I think Mr. Nariman and Mrs. Nariman traveled with Mr. and Mrs. Venkatachaliah abroad, the Indo-UK Legal Forum, the Indo-US Legal Forum to South America. And you did tell us some nice stories. I remember when you shared them with us.
Yes, I do remember. It was a great thing. And I particularly remember two facets of that trip. One was that we first discovered what a beautiful voice Mrs. Venkatachaliah had, because she regaled us with quite a few songs on occasions whenever the group from India met, and that was one thing. But I also recall something which the vegetarians will not like, but it was the fact that they are totally non-vegetarian, as you know, the people in South America. This was in South America, in Argentina. And we were all invited over the weekend to a farmhouse where there was to be lunch and a lot of entertainment and things of that sort. And we all enjoyed ourselves, we all went there. Venkatachaliah was also, I mean, he had a certain sense of fun. So he accompanied our Parekh, secretary of the Bar Association, in his car and came there. But the hosts apparently had carcasses of cows put outside as a sort of decoration, and they didn't think anything of it. And Venkatachaliah, poor fellow, he was most embarrassed. He said, shoo, I can't possibly get into this particular place. And then fortunately, Parekh had brought some Indian condiments, etc. And all of them sat in the car the whole afternoon and regaled themselves with some stories and some of the stuff that Parekh had brought. And he refused to come in. But that was one of the odd things that happened on this tour. But he was otherwise, I can tell you that the Chief Justice, like most Chief Justices, whenever they went abroad, he was a great sport. And he would participate in most of the events that took place.
So, the attorney, sir, your experiences, personal anecdotes.
Just as my memory has been fading, just like 5 minutes. I remember after he retired, I had called on him in Bangalore at his house.
Yeah.
And he told me, and that's what I was just seeing in your book, that he was totally dedicated to the Kollur Mugambika temple. And his wish in life was to go and sit there and meditate before the goddess. And therefore he said he may do it. But I know that he had taken a lot of interest from what I'm just reading in the book about the Kollur Mugambika temple. And I'm sure, because he's listening now, I hope he remembers this, that he wanted to go and spend his time there for the rest of his life practically. But I remember another incident where I was part of a delegation in the English, that is India-British Forum. And we are supposed to go to the House of Parliament there, House of Commons. And when we went there, and this is what I've read here also in some other case, we are told that we had to be frisked because before entering the House of Commons, which is done to everybody. And Venkatachaliah and the Chief Justice, he was then a puisne judge, was prepared for that. But when Venkatachaliah said, no, in no circumstance would I be prepared to have myself frisked. And therefore, frisk means in the sense they would have used the handheld machine. And therefore, it is merely because of him we did not enter the House of Commons. He was very strict about it. And I just read here that similarly, he had refused to go to a place when he went for a dinner at the president's house. And all the judges are invited by the president once a year, all the judges of the Supreme Court. And when he wanted to enter, they said he has to be frisked. He said, no, there's no question about it. And he turned around and went back home. And finally, the president apologized to him when he heard about this and invited him for a private dinner. And that is Justice Venkatachaliah, a very great man indeed.
So it's no doubt true that he is a great scholar in all branches of law, but people rightly ask for more than scholarship. At the end of the day, a judge is estimated in terms of his outlook and nature, as they say. Would each of you comment a word or so on that, sir? The outlook and nature of Justice Venkatachaliah, apart from the scholarship, which is, of course, universally recognized.
See, he had that great quality which I think that which is rare amongst judges and chief justices of either high courts or Supreme Court. I remember Chief Justice Chagla had that quality in Bombay, but I have not seen that in any other chief justice in Delhi. You see, as I said before, every judge looked up to him not only for his integrity, but for his scholarship. So when you look up to some person, then the response always is a sort of a benevolent response. That is to say, you become the guardian of the court, as it were. That is how the Chief Justice has to be reckoned. It's not only that he is first amongst all the judges. That's only what the Constitution says. But he is also the guardian of the values and the morals of the court. And therefore, I've rarely seen judges of the, because I've been practicing here from 1972, that regularly, and I've seen a whole host of chief justices. They were all very amiable, good people, but none of them had that spark of greatness which I saw in Venkatachaliah, and without flaunting that greatness, because you can also flaunt it, but he never flaunted it. He was always most respectful, most humble, etc., and genuinely humble. And that's what I greatly admired about it. Greatly admired about it. He had a quality also of friendship amongst judges. I still recall that Justice Sharma and Justice Verma were also very great friends in court, very great friends. And yet, when it came to a decision in a court of law, like in Kyoto's case, Sharma for one reason, Verma for another reason, differed from Venkatachaliah. And there, Venkatachaliah, unlike in Antole's case, was a majority judge, and the minority, which was again a very good judgment of Sharma and Verma on the 10th schedule, ruled otherwise than the majority. So they didn't bother, and that didn't affect their friendship. That is one of the remarkable things. Because I still remember that when Justice Sharma retired and visited Delhi, he always stayed either with Justice Verma or Justice Venkatachaliah when he came back. And it was a very nice feeling to have that camaraderie on the bench as well.
I think we are coming to the end of the session. Can I have just a short response from the attorney and Mr. Venkatramani also on this before we wind up, as the organizers are hinting to me that time is up.
The main thing about it is that so far as Chief Justice Venkatachaliah was concerned, he was a great human being. And I remember a case which I don't know whether Pali will remember, where a very prominent retired judge of the Supreme Court of India had participated and given an opinion in a matter which later was taken up in the Bombay High Court. And this same judge was appointed as an arbitrator in that case. He should have recused himself, but he failed to do so. And the result was that the government came up, and the government had a copy of his opinion and wanted to place it before the court.
Yes.
But told the party,
Yeah.
I won't allow this case to go on. You better agree to the matter going back to the Bombay High Court. Let it be argued on merits. Let's forget this arbitrary award. He could have decided that so far as the judge is concerned, the retired judge, he was guilty of a misconduct.
Impropriety.
And therefore, he refrained from doing so and saved the judge, as otherwise the judge would have been in serious, very serious trouble. And I was in the case and I did not want the client to continue with this case. Client refused, but the Chief Justice Venkatachaliah told him, you better withdraw it, otherwise I'm going to take serious action against you as well. And therefore the matter was remitted back to the Bombay High Court.
Yeah.
He did all this because he did not want the judiciary to be exposed to this sort of toxicity.
Justice was a watchword for it. Justice.
Yes, yes, yes.
Justice.
That's the greatness of the judge.
Yeah, yes, good, great.
Yes.
Mr. Venkatramani, sir, a last word from you.
It's again maybe anecdotal. I think is given to very few blessed people to seamlessly connect the life of law and the laws of life. Venkatachaliah had that seamless connection. And just about 6.5 years ago in 2016, probably you know, and there's a book written by a person called Sri M, and was written his autobiography, born in a Muslim family, talking about his previous birth as a Hindu yogi and things like that. And the former king of Travancore, when I went to meet him, had asked me to read this book. And I picked up the book in Bangalore airport. I found just Venkatachalaiah's photograph somewhere in the middle. So after reading that book, I called just Venkatachaliah and said, sir, I just read this book. Can you tell me about your acquaintance with this very incredible autobiography? He said it needs a lot of time for me to talk about that. But I just left it there. But 2016, this gentleman, Sri M, had organized the Padayatra from Kanyakumari to Kashmir. And he did that in a grand way. And just Venkatachaliah came to Delhi. Along with him, myself, Mrs. Venkatramani, Venkatachaliah, and a few others walked somewhere from the southern part of Delhi, about 15 kilometers. Walked all the way. I really admire this great judge's humility and being part of a great endeavor, which probably he thought is a great unifying force of a great tradition and culture. And Sri M, as I said, is always grateful to Venkatachaliah for his presence in Delhi. And he says that's a remarkable thing to happen for a Chief Justice of India to walk with us. So I think that's a kind of a walk he had with all of us. And that walk, I think, as I said, is a very rare walk. I am thankful to you once again for calling me today evening.
Good.
Thank you very much, each one of you, very eminent panelists. It has been my pleasure and privilege to be with you. And thank you very much once again. Namaskar.
Thank you, Dr.
Gentlemen, it's been a fantastic discussion and recollections on Justice Venkatachaliah. I'm sure he certainly commands and always commanded respect and admiration. It is said that, he has a kind of spiritual reverence. Anybody who comes in contact with him, it rubs off on him. And I've experienced it myself and been a beneficiary of his spiritual reverence. Mr. Sudesh Pai, Mr. Fali Nariman, Mr. Venkataramani, Mr. Venugopal, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I look forward to seeing you on the 14th, which is Saturday, later this week. Namaskar.
Namaskar, sir. Good evening, sir.
Namaskar.